Yeah.
So yeah, with that synergy, we want to talk about why everyone in the preseason and why teams are focusing on picking their players with this whole jungle support synergy in mind. So let's talk about this. Why are supports and junglers considered in the synergy? What is so important about those two roles, or what is so synergistic about those two roles to have a huge impact in picking your players on your team?
So I think the main thing, right? I think the first thing that we should mention is that even though the supports do care a lot about what's happening in the lane, right? They're very similar to junglers where they're not as mechanically intensive, which doesn't mean that the player doesn't have to be good mechanically, right? But it's more of
Not
like
saying
the
that
fact
they aren't mechanically good players.
exactly. It's more of like that they don't have to do much, right? It's very few times like you don't even have to last hit, right?
Yeah.
Even with Targons, like it's usually very favorable and you don't even have to like truly last hit, right? And I mean, they will probably already know how to do that, but it's like they don't have to focus on laning, right? They don't have to focus on what their enemy is immediately doing. I mean, again, for supports, it's a little different, but at the same time, it's like, oh, they went to ward, so that means I can go to ward, right?
Yeah.
Or if my jungler's down here, like, so the jungler is going to be mainly just focusing with his camps, right, and kiting and stuff. But after that, like, he's going to be focusing on the map. And we already discussed this. That's something that the supports do, especially in the bottom side of the map. So they both have a lot of macro, right? Macro knowledge. For our fans that might not be super aware, that just means what's going on in the map, right? Which lane is being pushed in, which lanes are winning, which lanes, have power spikes coming, like stuff like that comes through like a macro sense. And even putting some vision in, your enemy jungle, that way when they're gonna gank. That's macro knowledge, right?
Yeah. And what ends up happening is especially for supports over junglers, but especially supports, they climb the ranked ladders and they get to the top of the standings and become the best of the best, mostly through macro play, because they don't deal the most damage. They cannot do things really alone and carry the games like, a fed assassin that kind of snowballs the game from the mid lane or top lane or something like that. Or an AD carry that just stays safe and makes sure that they do the most damage in the team fights and they win off of the mechanical play. Supports, like, yes, you can get good hooks and have some flashy plays to get good engagements and wins. But for the most part, you don't have the damage. And if you make those good hooks, like if they're not at the right time or the right decisions or have thoughtfulness behind the decision to do those plays, like nothing comes of that. So you really need they emphasize having a lot of good macro and understanding of the game, because they're like, hey team, like let's stop fighting mid and let's split the map, or let's go do this objective right now, or let's go do this turret right now. And they actually win the game through more of like a chess match rather than like, like throwing 3-point shots,
aggression,
stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's why you do see a lot of jungles and supports that are successful. They win because they have that good understanding. And then when we're talking about the top 1%, then the micro plays and the mechanics and getting those amazing hooks and stuff like that is really, really important to separate the cream from the crop.
Right. And I think also even Ole, right, such a famous support this year with Immortals, he got ranked 1. And people asked him, like, how did you get rank 1? Just purely playing support. And he was like, well, I made sure I got some early kills, right? So I could get my Moby boots and I could get my vision control like early. Yeah. And then I just roamed the entire map, like game, and just pretty much got all my lanes fed. And it's like, yeah, that's a solo queue mentality, but it does translate a lot professional, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, it's kind of like going that extra mile of like knowing when to go, right? It's not, because I've seen even mid laners, right, do this where it's like, yeah, mid laner's supposed to roam, but they just roam when their wave is being pushed in, so they're going to lose experience anyway, and it's like they don't have mana, they don't like, you can't just roam whenever because you need to roam, right? It's a good understanding of this, having a good awareness of like, hey, mid laner doesn't have flash, right?
Yeah.
I have my full combo on full mana. I have Moby boots, perfect time to go,
Hmm.
right? Or their jungler is mid and their bot lane just bagged. I don't have much gold, right? Like we already talked about this. But supports don't have much gold to like be able to say, hey, yeah, I'll back exactly what my. So that's when they can roam, right? That's when they can start doing stuff. So it is a lot of awareness as well, right? Which I
Hmm.
think is super important.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we talk about these two roles, where not, they don't have mechanically intensive laning phases or early games, and they have less gold, they dealing probably not as much damage. They have other things to focus on, and with their knowledge and stuff, they communicate well to each other. We talked earlier about having a lot of vision control because a jungler can roam around the whole map, so he can place wards wherever he wants, or he can sneak and take peeks into the enemy jungle. You have the support who can kind of build a sight stone, which allows them to put 3 or 4 wards down, plus vision denial, all these kind of things that they move together and they work together. At least successful teams, they work together. So the support doesn't necessarily have to go into the enemy jungle all by themselves. They can go with a jungler, or they both can go mid lane and gank for the mid laner so they can take that turret together. So because these two roles have more time to look at the map, they have less, their brain is working less on certain things. They can use it for strategy, and then just their itemization builds and just like their role on a lot of teams. These are the two roles that really want to communicate and figure out how to lead the team and what the best decision for the team is to win the game, and then take all the information that their team tells them about each lane and then go ahead and basically make the conclusion that we're going to go mid lane in 2 minutes, or we're going to push bot lane with 4 people, teleport bot, and dive, stuff like that. This is why that synergy is super, super important between those. Because if you've ever tried a last hit and like talk as an AD carry, it's not easy. It's really not easy.
Right, which makes it so rare, right?
Uh-huh.
And it's like that's why you have very few AD carries that truly have like this shot calling call or this shot
Yeah.
calling role, right?
Uh-huh.
And I think that's something else to note. I mean, most main shot callers are either junglers or supports, right?
Yep.
We see this a lot in so many teams. We would see this in C9 with Smoothie. We've seen this with Mithy, always being known as one of the best shot callers in the West after Yellowstar left. So
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that, right? And it's like they just have like more time to look at things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, whether they
Or
might
mental
still
capacity, mental freedom, or something,
exactly.
to
I'd
be able
say
to do that.
more so than mental capacity, more like mental freedom to
Yeah.
do that, right? And it's
Yep.
like
Yep.
they're not always thinking about like necessarily last hitting everything, and it's interesting for sure. It definitely is interesting and like way to view that, and again I think this is the best time to go into examples of what has been good and what has been bad